It was hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk outside, but inside that sleek black Tesla, the air conditioning was cranked so high I could feel the chill settling deep into my bones. It wasn't just the cold air blowing from the vents, though, it was the silence. You know, that kind of heavy, suffocating silence that fills a room right before a storm breaks. That's what was sitting in that car with us. I looked over at my son Julian in the driver's seat. He was gripping that leather steering wheel so tight his knuckles were turning white, like he was holding on to a cliff edge. He wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes glued to the road, staring at the heat waves shimmering off the asphalt like they were the most interesting thing in the world. He was wearing those expensive Persol sunglasses I bought him for his 35th birthday, $300 for a piece of plastic and glass, and a linen shirt that probably cost more than my first car. He looked every inch the successful real estate developer he pretended to be, but a mother knows her child. I saw the sweat beading at his temple. I saw the way a little muscle in his jaw kept jumping. That wasn't the sweat of a man on his way to a nice family lunch. That was the sweat of a coward. In the back seat, my daughter-in-law, Monica, was busy tapping away on her phone. Tap, tap. That sound was the only thing keeping time in the car. She didn't look up. She hadn't looked at me since we pulled out of my driveway on Willow Creek Lane. She was probably back there curating her Instagram story, putting a filter on her life to make it look perfect, erasing the tension, the debt, and the elderly mother sitting 3 feet away who paid for the data plan she was using. I cleared my throat, and the sound was like a gunshot in that quiet car. "Are we almost there, Julian?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, scratchy. The painkillers the doctor gave me for my hip surgery made my mouth feel like it was full of cotton. "You said we were going to a nice lunch spot. This looks like the industrial district." Julian flinched, just a tiny little jerk of his head, but I saw it. "It's a hidden gem, Ma," he said. His voice was tight, higher than usual. "Farm to table, very rustic. You'll love it. It's just tucked away, for the privacy." "Privacy," Monica snorted from the back seat. It was a nasty little sound, half laugh, half scoff. She tried to cover it up with a fake cough, but I heard it. "Yes, Clara. Privacy. It's exactly what you need right now. Peace and quiet." I looked out the window again. We were passing a cement factory, big gray smokestacks pumping white clouds into the blue sky. Then we passed a row of beat-up warehouses with 4 lease signs fading in the sun. This wasn't where you went for farm-to-table dining. This was where you went to hide things you didn't want anyone to find. A cold knot started to twist in my stomach, cutting right through the haze of the medicine. I pulled my handbag closer to my chest. It was just a reflex, a habit from 40 years of building Thorn Logistics from the ground up. Back when I had to walk into meetings with union bosses who thought a woman didn't belong at the table, my purse was my armor. I held on to it now like it was a life raft. Inside was my phone, my wallet, a packet of tissues, and something neither of them knew about, the original deed to the house Julian was currently driving back to. "Julian," I said, trying to sit up straighter against the leather seat, "turn the car around. I'm not hungry. I want to go home." "We can't, Mom," Julian said, and he pressed his foot down on the gas. The car surged forward, pushing me back into the seat. "We have a reservation. We're late. Just relax, okay? Trust me." Trust him. That phrase. That was the phrase that had cost me the most money and the most heartache in my life. "Trust me, Mom. This investment is a sure thing. Trust me, Mom. I just need a bridge loan until the deal closes. Trust me, Mom. Monica isn't like the other girls. She really loves me." We turned off the main road onto a gravel driveway lined with dying poplar trees. The tires crunched loud over the stones. At the end of the drive sat a sprawling, depressing building made of gray stucco. It looked like a shoebox someone had left out in the rain. It was surrounded by a chain-link fence that someone had tried to pretty up by weaving plastic ivy through the links, but the plastic was sun-bleached and peeling. The sign out front was faded, the letters barely legible. Serenity Gardens Assisted Living and Memory Care. My heart actually stopped for a second. It just froze in my chest. This wasn't a restaurant. This wasn't a surprise lunch. "Julian," I whispered, "what is this?" He didn't answer me. He pulled the car up to the curb, right in front of the automatic sliding doors. The glass was smeared. He put the car in park but kept the engine running. "Okay, Mom," he said. He finally took off his sunglasses and turned to look at me. His eyes were watery, shifting around, looking at my chin, my ear, the dashboard, anywhere but my eyes. He looked just like he did when he was 7 years old and broke my favorite vase, trying to kick the pieces under the rug before I got home. "This is it. Look, it's not permanent. It's just a respite stay, just for a few weeks." A respite stay? I repeated the words, but they didn't make sense. They tasted like ash in my mouth. I have a home. I have a guest cottage. I have a nurse who comes on Tuesdays. "It's not enough," Monica yelled from the back seat. She leaned forward between the seats, and her perfume filled up the car. It was heavy and floral, smelling like a funeral parlor. "You fell, Clara. You broke your hip. Next time it could be your head. We can't watch you 24/7. We have lives. We have careers." "Careers?" I snapped. A little spark of my old fire woke up in my belly. "Monica, you unbox purses on TikTok. That is not a career. And Julian, you haven't closed a real estate deal in 18 months. I pay the mortgage. I pay the utilities. I pay for this car we are sitting in right now." "That's exactly why you need to be here," Julian shouted. His voice cracked like a teenager's. "You're stressed. You're confusing things. You need professional help, Mom. I already signed the admission papers. They're expecting you. It's resort style. They have bingo. They have a garden. It's for your own good." I looked at my son. I looked deep into his face, searching for the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard with dirt under his fingernails. I looked for the young man I walked across the stage at graduation. He wasn't there. In his place was a weak, desperate man who was willing to throw his mother away like yesterday's trash just to secure his own comfort. "You signed the papers?" I asked quietly. "You have power of attorney." "I invoked the emergency clause," he muttered, looking out the windshield. "Dr. Evans signed off on it, said you were cognitively declining due to the trauma of the surgery." Dr. Evans? That quack Julian played golf with on Saturdays, of course. "Get out, Mom," he said, his voice trembling. "Please, don't make a scene. The orderlies are coming." I looked out the window. 2 large men in scrubs were walking toward the car, pushing a wheelchair. They didn't look like caregivers. They looked like bouncers at a cheap nightclub. I realized right then that if I fought, if I screamed, if I refused to move, they would just use it as proof. They would say, "See, she's aggressive, she's confused, she's declining." They would sedate me. They would drag me in there, and once those doors locked behind me, I might never get out. I had to be smarter. I had to be Clara Thorne. I had to be the CEO who ate hostile takeovers for breakfast. "Fine," I said. My voice was ice cold. "Open the trunk, get my bag." Julian looked so relieved he almost collapsed. He practically leaped out of the car. He popped the trunk, grabbed my small suitcase, and set it on the curb. He opened my passenger door. "I knew you'd understand, Ma," he said, reaching for my arm to help me out. I pulled my arm away. "Don't touch me." I swung my legs out of the car. Pain shot up my hip, white hot and blinding, tearing a gasp from my throat. But I grit my teeth and stood up. I grabbed my cane. I straightened my spine until I was standing as tall as a queen. I adjusted my silk scarf. "You're making a mistake, Julian," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "A very expensive mistake." "It's for the best," he mumbled, backing away toward the driver's seat like I was a fire he was afraid of catching. "We'll visit on Sunday. We'll bring your other things." "Yeah, Sunday," Monica called out from the back seat. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Bye, Clara." Julian jumped back into the car. He didn't wait for me to step away from the curb. He slammed the door, threw the Tesla into drive, and peeled away. The tires kicked up dust and gravel, stinging my legs. I stood there, a 60-year-old woman with a broken hip and a broken heart, watching the taillights of my own car disappear around the bend. The license plate, Julian 1, shimmered in the heat until it was gone. The silence rushed back in, heavy and hot and smelling of exhaust. "Mrs. Thorne?" One of the orderlies was standing next to me with the wheelchair. He had a look on his face that I knew well. It was pity. "Your son said you might be a bit resistant," he said. "Why don't you have a seat? We have some Jell-O inside. It's nice and cool in the lobby." I looked at the orderly. He was young, maybe 20. He had kind eyes, but he looked tired. "What is your name, son?" I asked. "David, ma'am." "David," I said, planting my cane firmly on the cracked concrete. "I am not checking in. I am not resistant. I am the victim of a kidnapping and abandonment. And if you try to put me in that wheelchair, I will sue this facility, your boss, and your grandmother for everything you will ever own." David blinked. He took a step back, holding his hands up. The paperwork." "Paperwork signed under duress and false pretenses is void," I said, channeling my lawyer Sterling. "Now, David, you seem like a smart boy. You are going to do two things for me. First, you are going to bring me a chair, a regular chair, so I can sit in the shade while I make a phone call. Second, you are going to forget you ever saw me." "But where will you go?" he asked. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that just realized the cage door was unlocked. "I'm going to take out the trash, David. I'm going home." David ran inside and brought me a plastic garden chair. I sat down in the shadow of the nursing home's awning. My hip was throbbing, pounding like a second heart, but my mind was clearing up. The adrenaline was burning off the brain fog. First things first, assessment. I pulled my phone out of my purse. I needed to know how much damage they had done. Julian had access to the joint checking account, the one I kept for household expenses. I usually kept about $20,000 in there for repairs, groceries, and emergencies. I opened the banking app. I logged in. Balance, $42.50. I stared at the screen. $42. I scrolled through the recent transactions. They were all from today. Pending, $5,000. Transfer to C. Jenkins. That was Monica's maiden name. Pending, $2,500. Liquor Barn. Pending, $12,000. Luxury Escapes Travel Agency. They weren't just dropping me off. They were fleeing. They had drained the account to fund a getaway. $12,000 for travel? Where on God's green earth were they going? I switched apps. I checked the credit card portal. My American Express Platinum. Pending charge. Delta Airlines, $4,200. 2 seats, first class, DFW to Cabo San Lucas. Pending charge. The Royal Palms Resort, $8,500. Deposit. Cabo. They had dropped me at a rundown nursing home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they were catching a 5 o'clock flight to Mexico. They planned to be sipping margaritas on a white sand beach while I was eating lime jello in a shared room with a stranger. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost impressive in a sick way. Julian, the boy who couldn't remember to take out the recycling on Tuesdays, had executed a precision strike on my life. But he had made one critical error. He assumed I was the woman he saw on Sundays, the soft, grandmotherly figure who baked cookies and wrote checks. He forgot about the woman Monday through Friday. He forgot about Clara Thorne, the CEO. He forgot who built the roof over his head. I dialed Sterling. Sterling was my personal attorney, my fixer, and my oldest friend. He answered on the first ring. "Clara," he said, "I thought you were resting post-op. How's the hip?" "The hip is fine, Sterling," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "The sun is the problem. I need you to listen to me, and I need you not to ask questions until I'm done." "Okay, I'm listening." Julian just dropped me off at Serenity Gardens and drove away. He stole my car. He drained the joint account, and he is currently en route to DWF Airport to fly to Cabo with Monica on my credit card. He what? Sterling's voice lost its professional calm. It went up an octave. "Clara, are you safe? Do you want me to call the police?" "Not yet," I said. "If we call the police now, it's a civil dispute. It's a family matter. They'll file a report and tell me to sue him. I don't want a report, Sterling. I want justice. I want to catch him in a trap he can't talk his way out of." "What do you need?" "I need you to meet me at the Willow Creek house. Bring Mr. Grantham, the locksmith, the expensive one, the one who can crack a biometric safe and doesn't talk to the press." "The locksmith? Clara, do you not have your keys?" "I suspect my keys won't work, Sterling, and I suspect the codes have been changed. I need to get back into my house, and I need to do it before they land in Mexico." "I'm leaving the office now," Sterling said. "I can hear him grabbing his keys. I'll be there in 40 minutes. "And Sterling?" "Yes?" "Bring the eviction paperwork, the immediate notice to vacate, and bring the paperwork to revoke the power of attorney. I want it ready for my signature the second I walk through that door." "Understood." I hung up the phone. Then I opened the Uber app. I ordered a car. While I waited, I looked at the nursing home one last time. It was a warehouse for the unwanted, a place to store people when they became inconvenient. Julian thought I belonged here. He thought my usefulness was over. I stood up, wincing as my weight settled on my bad hip. I walked to the curb to meet the black sedan pulling up. "You heading home, ma'am?" the driver asked as I slid into the back seat. "Yes," I said, looking at the reflection of my eyes in the rearview mirror. They looked hard. They looked dangerous. I'm going to take back my kingdom. The ride back to Willow Creek Lane felt like it took 100 years, even though the GPS said it was only 30 minutes. I sat in the back of that black Uber sedan, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline, watching the little airplane icon on the flight tracker app inch its way across the screen. Delta Flight 492 to Cabo San Lucas. Status, on time. Altitude, 30,000 feet. They were up there in the clouds, probably clinking champagne glasses in first class, laughing about how easy it was to trick the old lady. I could almost hear Monica's shrill giggle echoing in my head, talking about how she was finally going to be able to decorate the house the way she wanted now that the eyesore was gone. I stared out the window as the city skyline faded into the manicured green lawns of my neighborhood. Willow Creek isn't just a street, it's a statement. It's where the doctors, the lawyers, and the CEOs live. It's quiet. It's peaceful. It's the kind of place where the biggest scandal is usually someone leaving their trash cans out past noon on pickup day. and here I was, about to break into my own home like a common criminal. The driver, a nice man named Kevin, who had the good sense not to ask why I was staring at my phone with a look that could curdle milk, turned onto my street. The oak trees cast long, dappled shadows across the lawns, everything looking so perfect, so normal. It made my stomach turn. How could the world keep spinning when my entire life had just been upended? We pulled up to my driveway. The house stood there, majestic and silent, a 4-bedroom colonial with white pillars and black shutters that I had paid for in cash 3 years ago. I paid the property taxes. I paid the landscaper who kept the hydrangeas blooming blue and purple. I paid for the roof over my son's head. The driveway was empty. Julian's Tesla was gone, obviously parked at the airport by now, racking up fees I was sure he expected me to pay. But there was another car parked on the street, a vintage Jaguar, British racing green, polished to a mirror shine. Elias. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Seeing that car was the first. Keep the mature female voice, aged 50+. However, I want a calmer, flatter delivery with less dramatic pitch variation and fewer emotional ups and downs. The focus should be clarity and steadiness, reading the text in a straightforward, easy-to-understand manner, almost like a calm audiobook narration. Crucially, while maintaining this calm style, increase the reading pace significantly so it is fluent and conversational, not slow or heavy. Thing that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't going to lose my mind. I paid the driver and got out, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my hip as my foot hit the pavement. Elias stepped out of his car immediately. He was wearing a charcoal suit, impeccable as always, despite the heat. Behind him was a short, burly man carrying a heavy tool bag, Mr. Grantham, the locksmith. Elias walked quickly to meet me, his face etched with concern. "Beatrice," he said, taking my hand for a brief moment, "you look pale." I told him I was furious, and that rage consumes a lot of blood. I gestured toward the front door and told them we should get this over with. We walked up the path to the porch. It felt surreal. This was the porch where I drank my coffee in the mornings. This was the door I had hung a wreath on last Christmas. I reached out and punched my code into the smart lock keypad. Beep, beep, beep. A red light flashed. Access denied. I stared at it. I tried again, typing the numbers slowly, deliberately. Beep, beep, beep. Access denied. The little mechanical voice from the lock chirped at me, mocking me. He deleted me. Before he even dropped me off at that nursing home, before he even put the car in park, he had logged into the system and deleted my code. He had erased me from my own home. That wasn't just panic. That was premeditated. That was malice. I looked at Sterling and told him to open it. Mr. Grantham stepped forward, looking at the lock with a professional squint. He told me it was a high-security smart bolt and that if he drilled it, the lock would be destroyed. I told him to destroy it. I told him I was replacing it anyway. The sound of that drill biting into the metal was loud and violent. It whined and ground, chewing through the mechanism, a harsh, ugly noise that shattered the peace of the neighborhood. I saw Mrs. Higgins next door peek through her curtains, but I didn't care. Let them look. Let them see what happens when you push Beatrice Washington too far. It took less than a minute. There was a loud crack, the sound of metal giving way, and the door swung open. The cool air of the house hit my face, but it didn't smell like my house anymore. It smelled of Monica's expensive, cloying perfume and something else, stale alcohol and grease. I stepped inside. The foyer was a mess. There were muddy footprints on the rug, my antique Persian rug that I had explicitly asked them not to wear shoes on. A stack of unopened mail sat on the console. Table, teetering over the edge. I walked past it into the living room, and I stopped dead in my tracks. It looked like a fraternity house after a bender. There were empty White Claw cans scattered on the coffee table, leaving rings on the wood. A half-eaten pizza box sat open on the sofa, grease soaking into the fabric. But that wasn't what made the breath catch in my throat. My eyes went to the mantel above the fireplace. For 20 years, a large oil painting of my late husband, Marcus, had hung there. It was my favorite portrait of him. He looked strong, kind, looking out over the room he had worked so hard to provide for. It was the first thing I looked at every morning. It was gone. In its place was a neon sign, a bright pink buzzing neon sign that said, "Good vibes only." I felt a physical blow to my chest, like someone had swung a sledgehammer right into my sternum. I stumbled, grabbing the back of the sofa for support. I whispered his name. Where is he? Where is Marcus? Sterling was already moving through the room, his face grim. He called my name softly and pointed to a pile of cardboard boxes near the back door. They were marked with black marker, donation/trash. I walked over, my legs feeling like lead, my cane tapping hollowly on the hardwood. I tore the tape off the top box. Inside were my photo albums, my vintage cookbooks collected over 40 years of catering, my collection of porcelain birds, and jammed down the side, the canvas bent and creased, was the portrait of Marcus. They were throwing us away. They weren't just moving me out, they were erasing our existence. They were cleansing the house of anything that didn't fit Monica's Instagram aesthetic. I pulled the painting out. I smoothed the canvas with trembling hands. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. He threw his father in the trash. He threw the man who built this legacy into a donation box for a neon sign. Sterling put a hand on my shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. He told me we needed to check the rest of the house. He said if they were purging, we needed to check the valuables, the safe. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. I ran up the stairs, ignoring the screaming pain in my hip. I burst into the master bedroom, the room I had let them take because Monica complained the guest room was too small for her yoga mat. It was in chaos. Clothes were everywhere. It looked like they had packed with a shovel. I went to the walk-in closet, pushing aside rows of Monica's designer dresses that I knew I had paid for. The wall safe was behind a panel. I keyed in the master override code, praying to God Julian hadn't figured out how to change that one too. Beep, green light, it clicked open. I pulled the heavy door back and fell to my knees. Empty. My diamond earrings were gone. The sapphire necklace Marcus gave me for our 25th anniversary was gone. The stack of emergency cash, $10,000 in hundreds I kept for a rainy day, was gone. The gold bullion coins, gone. It was all gone. They hadn't just gone on vacation, they had looted the house. They had stripped the assets. They were smuggling my fortune to Mexico in their carry-on luggage. I screamed for Sterling. Call the police, call them now. Sterling ran into the room, saw the empty safe, and saw me on the floor. He pulled out his phone immediately. Grand larceny, he said. This is a felony, a major one. I struggled to stand up, using the shelf for support. Report it, I said. Report it all. The cash, the jewelry, the car. I want a warrant issued. I want them picked up the second they land. Sterling was dialing 911, explaining that we couldn't stop the plane in international airspace, but we could have customs waiting. I told him about the cards. I stood up and walked to the bed and sat down on the edge of the mattress. I pulled out my phone and called the bank fraud department again. I told the agent I needed to update my report. I told her I was reporting the theft of physical assets from my home along with the credit card theft. I told her to flag every single transaction. I told her that when they landed, I wanted them to try to rent a car and be denied. I wanted them to try to check into that hotel and be turned away. I wanted them stranded in Cabo with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a stolen watch they couldn't sell. The agent confirmed everything was locked down. I hung up and looked around the room. The violation was absolute. My son was a thief, a con artist. But as I looked at the mess on the nightstand, I saw something else. A piece of paper hastily scribbled on in Julian's messy handwriting. It was tucked under a lamp. I picked it up. Vinny, $50K by Friday or legs. Crypto rigs, electric bill past due. House loan, pending signature. Vinny. Who was Vinny? And $50,000 by Friday or legs? That sounded like a threat.
That sounded like a loan shark. And house loan, pending signature, my blood went cold. Julian wasn't stealing jewelry. He was trying to mortgage the house. He was trying to take out a loan against my property, but he needed my signature. Or a power of attorney, that was it. That's why the nursing home. That's why the sudden dementia diagnosis he had paid Dr. Evans for. If I was declared incompetent, he could sign for me. He could take out a second mortgage, pay off this Vinny, and sink me into debt I would never recover from. He wasn't just a thief, he was desperate. He was in trouble deep enough to kill his mother for a way out. I walked out of the closet with the note in my hand. "Sterling," I said, "we have a bigger problem than stolen jewelry." I handed him the note. Sterling read it and his face went pale. He said Vinny sounded like organized crime. He said if Julian was trying to mortgage the house, he needed me out of the way to intercept the paperwork. I told him we needed to secure the title. He said he would file an affidavit of identity theft with the county clerk immediately to freeze any attempts to borrow against the property. I told him to do it, and then I told him I needed security. If Julian owes $50,000 to a man who threatens to break legs, and Julian isn't here to pay it, who do you think Vinny is going to come looking for? Sterling looked at me, and the realization dawned on him. He said, "He'll come to the house." "Exactly," I said. "My son didn't just rob me. He painted a target on my back and left town." I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway where the sun was starting to set. "Call Mr. Graves," I said. "I want armed security at the gate. I want a patrol car in the driveway, and I want someone to find out who this Vinny is." Sterling told me it was dangerous and I should go to a hotel. "No," I said firmly, "this is my house. I fought for it. I paid for it. I am not running. If Vinny comes, he can deal with me. If Julian comes back, he can deal with me." I turned back to the room. "I'm staying, and I'm changing the locks on the basement, too. I want to see what these crypto rigs are." The basement of the Willow Creek house had always been a space of contention between us. When I first bought the property with a cashier's check that represented 40 years of sweating over hot stoves, I had envisioned that space as a library, a quiet, cool sanctuary lined with cedar shelves where I could retire with a book and a glass of vintage red wine after a long week of board meetings. But Julian had begged for it. He had pleaded with those big brown eyes that used to get him out of trouble when he stole cookies before dinner. He called it his sanctuary, a place where he could decompress from the so-called stress of his non-existent job. He wanted a man cave. I had relented, as I always did, because saying yes to Jillian was a habit I had formed over 30 years, a habit harder to break than nicotine. Now, standing at the top of the carpeted stairs, staring down into the darkness, I realized that my yes had been the key to my own prison. I motioned for Sterling and Mr. Graves to follow me. My hip was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache, but I forced my legs to move, one step at a time, descending into the belly of the house. The air grew warmer as we went down, which didn't make sense because basements are supposed to be the coolest part of the house. By the time we reached the bottom landing, the air was stifling, carrying a metallic, electrical smell that tickled the back of my throat. We stood before the heavy steel door Julian had installed 6 months ago. He had told me it was for soundproofing, so his video games wouldn't disturb my sleep. I had believed him. I was such a fool. I punched in the master code on the keypad. Access denied, of course. He hadn't connected this door to the main house system. It was on a separate, closed circuit. I looked at Mr. Grantham, the locksmith, who was wiping sweat from his forehead. I asked him if he could open it. He tapped the steel with his knuckles, a hollow thud echoing in the narrow hallway. He told me it was a solid-core security door, the kind you see in jewelry stores or panic rooms. He said drilling it would take hours, but he could try to bypass the electronic lock if I had a crowbar. I told him I had a toolbox in the garage. We spent the next 40 minutes working on that door. It was stubborn. It was fortified. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. I kept checking my watch, calculating flight times, calculating how long it would take them to realize they were stranded and find a way back. Finally, with a loud, sickening crack that sounded like a bone breaking, the locking mechanism gave way. Mr. Graves stepped forward, shoved his shoulder against the steel, and the door swung open. The heat that rolled out of that room wasn't just warm, it was a physical wall. It hit me in the face, dry and smelling of ozone and burning dust. It was a mechanical, unnatural heat that instantly made my silk blouse stick to my back. And the noise, Lord have mercy, the noise. It sounded like a jet engine was idling inside my house. It was a relentless, high-pitched drone of hundreds of cooling fans spinning at maximum velocity. I stepped inside, squinting against the eerie, futuristic glow of blinking green and blue LED lights that bathed the room in a sickly underwater hue. I looked around and my stomach dropped through the floor. The man cave furniture was gone. The pool table I had spent $4,000 on was gone. The vintage leather sofa was pushed into a corner, buried under a mountain of pizza boxes and empty energy drink cans. In their place were racks, floor-to-ceiling metal racks lined with computer servers stacked like bricks of gold, humming and vibrating with power. Cables snaked out of them in a chaotic web of black and red wires that ran across the floor to a massive industrial-grade power distribution unit in the corner that looked like it belonged in a factory, not a suburban home. I shouted over the noise, asking Mr. Graves what on earth I was looking at. Graves walked over to one of the racks, his face grim, inspecting the hardware. He told me it was a mining farm, a crypto mining operation. He explained that these machines were designed to solve complex math problems to earn digital currency like Bitcoin. He said Julian was trying to print money. I asked him if it was profitable. Graves looked at the setup, shook his head, and shouted back that the electricity required to run a rig this size was astronomical. He said we were talking thousands of dollars a month, maybe $10,000 a month. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I thought about my utility bills. I had put them on autopay years ago to save time. I realized with a jolt of nausea that I hadn't looked at a detailed breakdown in months. I had just assumed the rising costs were due to the pool heater or the AC running in the Texas heat. I had been paying for the electricity to run the machines that were being used to steal my future. I walked over to a desk in the corner, a cheap folding table that looked like it belonged at a garage sale. It was the only workspace in the room, and it was buried under a landslide of paper. I started shifting through it, my hands trembling. There were fast food wrappers, unpaid parking tickets, and notices. So many notices. Urgent notice, Texas Power and Light, past due amount, $14,500. Service. Disconnection scheduled for August 15th. He hadn't even been paying the bill. He was letting it pile up in my name. I dug deeper. I found a thick envelope from Apex High Risk Lending. I opened it. The header read, Final Demand. Balance, $250,000. Collateral, 1402 Willow Creek Lane. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had to grab the edge of the desk to keep from falling. Foreclosure. The house was paid off. I had paid cash. There was no mortgage. How could there be a foreclosure notice? I scanned the document, my eyes blurring. It was a deed of trust, a second lien on the house. He had borrowed $250,000 against the equity of my home. Sterling stepped forward and took the paper from my shaking hand. He adjusted his glasses, reading it in the dim blue light. He flipped to the last page and pointed to the bottom line. There, in black ink, was a signature, Clara Thorne. It was a good forgery, a very good one, but it wasn't mine. The loop on the C was too wide, the slant was slightly off. It was the signature of someone who had sat at a kitchen table practicing my name 1,000 times until he got it right. He forged it. My son committed felony fraud to turn my home into collateral for this loud, hot, useless room of machines. Sterling told me he must have had a notary in his pocket, that this was a conspiracy, not just a bad investment. I looked at the desk again. Under the loan documents was a notebook, a simple spiral-bound college notebook. I opened it. It was a ledger. I recognized Julian's messy scrawl immediately. Rig cost, $120,000. Cooling upgrade, $30,000. Vinny, interest only, $5,000 a week. Vinny, principal, $150,000. Projected profit, $50,000 a month. Actual profit, $2,400. I did the math in my head and the numbers made me want to scream. He had borrowed $250,000 against my house. He had borrowed another $150,000 from a man named Vinny. He had spent nearly $500,000 on equipment that was generating $2,000 a month. He wasn't just a thief, he was an idiot, a catastrophic, delusional idiot who had gambled my entire life on a get-rich-quick scheme he didn't understand. I asked Graves who Vinny was. Graves looked at the name in the ledger and his face went hard. He told me Vinny Moretti ran a sports book out of a warehouse downtown. He told me Vinny was a loan shark, a real one, the kind who charges 5 points a week and collects with a baseball bat. My son owed a mobster $150,000, and he had put my house up as collateral for the rest. Graves told me urgently that if he owed Vinny money and Vinny knew where he lived, then the house was a target. He said we needed to shut it down immediately because the heat signature alone was a beacon and the wiring was a fire hazard. I told him to kill it. Graves went to the main breaker panel on the wall. He threw the master switch with a heavy clunk. The roar of the fans died instantly. The blinking lights went dark. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy and ringing, leaving my ears buzzing. But in that sudden quiet, my attention was drawn to one last thing on the desk, a computer monitor that was still on, powered by a backup battery unit. It wasn't showing crypto stats. It wasn't showing a spreadsheet. It was showing a live video feed. I leaned in closer. It was a feed of my bedroom, the guest cottage, the kitchen, hidden cameras. He had been watching me. He had been watching to see when I checked the mail so he could intercept the foreclosure notices. He had been watching to see when I was asleep so he could come down here and work. He had been watching to see if I noticed the utility bills. I felt violated in a way that words couldn't describe. My own son had turned my sanctuary into a surveillance state. "Turn it off," I whispered, my voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like white fire. "Turn it all off." Graves reached over and ripped the power cord out of the wall. The screen went black. We stood there in the dark, silent basement, surrounded by the cooling metal of the machines that had cost my son his soul. I held the foreclosure notice in my hand. Julian was in Mexico, or trying to get back. But the bank didn't care about where he was. The loan sharks didn't care. The debt was attached to the house, to my house. If I didn't fix this, I would be homeless at 62. I looked at the ledger again in the beam of Graves' flashlight. Vinny. The name popped up 3 times. Vinny. Late fee. Vinny. Final warning. Julian owed $50,000 to a loan shark immediately, on top of the bank loan. And loan sharks don't sue. They break legs, or they burn houses down. I told Graves we had a problem. I told him the foreclosure I could handle with lawyers, but Vinny was a different animal. If Julian wasn't here to pay, Vinny would come looking for the next best thing. He would come looking for the owner of the house. Graves touched his earpiece. He said he would double the perimeter and call in a second team. I told him to do it, and I told him to find out everything about Vinny Moretti, where he eats, where he sleeps, who his mother is, because if he came to my door looking for my son's debt, I wanted to be the one who knocked. We walked out of the basement, ascending the stairs back into the main house. I felt heavier, older. The betrayal was absolute now. There was no going back, no reconciliation. My son had sold me out for digital coins and a gambling addiction. I walked into the kitchen. The clock on the microwave read 8:15 p.m. I was about to ask Sterling to pour me a drink when I heard it, a sound from the driveway, a car door slamming, then shouting. I froze. Sterling hissed my name. Graves pulled his sidearm, holding it low against his leg. We moved into the foyer. Through the frosted glass panels of the front door, I could see silhouettes. Someone was banging on the wood, rattling the handle. "Open the damn door." The voice was raw, cracking with exhaustion and entitlement. It was Julian. "I know you're in there. I see the lights." Then Monica's voice joined in, shrill and piercing. "This is insane. Call the police, Julian. She stole our house." I took a deep breath. The pain in my hip was a dull roar, but the anger in my chest was a symphony. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door just as far as the heavy security chain would allow, about 4 inches. The gap revealed Julian's face. He looked wrecked. His expensive linen shirt was stained with sweat. His hair was matted. He smelled of airport stress and stale alcohol. He jammed his face into the gap. "Mom," he shouted, "what the hell is going on? My key doesn't work. The code doesn't work." I looked at him, this stranger wearing my son's face, and I said calmly, "Because you don't live here anymore." He blinked at me like a confused owl, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out, as if his brain couldn't quite process the words I had just spoken. The humidity of the Texas night was creeping into the foyer through the crack in the door, carrying with it the sound of cicadas and the distant hum of the highway, but the air between us was
frozen solid. "What?" he finally managed to choke out, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Mom, stop playing games. Let us in. We've been stuck in airports for 12 hours. The cards were declined. We had to beg a stranger for cash just to get a taxi from DFW. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" I stood there, leaning on my cane, looking at the man who used to run to me when he scraped his knee, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hard resolve. "That sounds like a hardship, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "Perhaps you should have used the $12,000 you spent on the resort deposit to pay for a car service, or maybe the cash you got from pawning my mother's emerald ring." That stopped him cold. His face went from flushed red to a ghostly, sickly white in the span of a heartbeat. He looked at Monica, panic flaring in his eyes, but Monica looked just as terrified. You saw that?" he whispered. "I see everything, Julian," I told him. "I saw the flights. I saw the resort reservation. I saw the empty safe in my closet. And I saw the basement." If possible, he paled even further. He took a stumbling step back from the door as if I had physically slapped him. You went in the basement?" he stammered. "Mr. Graves cracked the door," I said, enjoying the terror dawning on his face. "We saw the mining farm. We saw the illegal wiring that's a fire hazard. And we saw the foreclosure notice from Apex Lending sitting right on top of your little ledger." Julian pulled back from the door, running a hand through his greasy, matted hair. He looked like a trapped animal searching for a way out of a cage he built himself. "Mom, look," he started, his voice dropping to that desperate, wheedling whisper he used when he needed money. "I can explain. It's an investment, a sure thing. I needed capital. I was going to pay off the loan next month. Crypto is about to boom. You just have to trust me." "Trust you?" I snapped, my voice cutting through his lies like a scalpel through rot. "You forged my signature on a deed of trust, Julian. You committed felony fraud against your own mother. You put my home, the home your father broke his back to build the foundation for, at risk of seizure by a predatory lender. I did it for
us, he screamed, slamming his hand against the doorframe so hard the glass rattled. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to show you I could do it, but you never trusted me. You always treated me like a child. You hoarded the money while I begged for scraps. I treated you like a child because you act like a thief. I shouted back, my control finally slipping, the rage pouring out of me hot and fast. A man doesn't steal his mother's jewelry. A man doesn't dump his mother at a nursing home so he can steal her house. A man doesn't borrow money from a mobster named Vinny and put his mother in the crosshairs. I didn't steal the jewelry, he lied, his eyes darting around the porch as if looking for an escape route. We moved it for safekeeping. We were protecting it. I found the pawn shop receipt, Julian, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. For the emerald ring, $800. You sold your grandmother's legacy for $800. The silence on the porch was deafening. Even Monica looked shocked. She turned to Julian, her eyes wide. You pawned the emerald ring, she screeched. You told me you put it in the safety deposit box. You told me we were just borrowing against the gold coins. Shut up, Monica, Julian snapped at her. He turned back to me, desperate now, grabbing the edge of the door. Mom, please, open the door. We can fix this. I'll get the ring back. I'll pay off the loan. Just let me in. I have nowhere to go. Vinny is looking for me. Ah, I said, Vinny, the man you owe $150,000 to. How do you know about Vinny? Julian whispered, genuine terror in his eyes now. I read your ledger, I said, and I know he threatens to break legs. But here is the reality, Julian. You aren't safe in this house. You turned this house into a crime scene, and criminals don't get sanctuary. Monica pushed forward, shoving Julian aside. Her face was twisted into a snarl, her makeup smeared, looking like a demon under the porch light. You can't do this, she shrieked. I have rights. I have residency. If you don't open this door right now, I will sue you for illegal eviction. I will tell everyone on social media that you abused us. I will ruin you. You can try, Sterling's voice came from behind me, calm and authoritative. He stepped into the light of the foyer, holding a sheaf of papers. But I have just filed an emergency protective order based on domestic theft and elder abuse. As of 4 p.m. today, a judge signed the order. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of this property or Mrs. Thorne. The police are already on their way to enforce it. Julian looked at Sterling, then at me, tears streaming down his face. You called the cops? He choked out. Mom, you called the cops on your own son? No, I said, my heart breaking into a million pieces in my chest, but my resolve hardening like steel. I called the cops on the man who stole my life. My son died a long time ago. I started to close the door. Mom, no, Mom, please. Julian threw his weight against the door, trying to force it open, his fingers scrabbling at the wood. The security chain strained against the pressure. Mr. Graves stepped forward from the shadows of the living room. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He just placed one large hand on the door and shoved. He was stronger than Julian, much stronger. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud. I threw the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the wood, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I listened to them scream. I listened to Julian pounding on the door, sobbing, begging me to open up. I listened to Monica cursing my name, calling me a witch, a hag, a monster. It was the worst sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my failure as a mother. It was the sound of the little boy I loved disappearing forever. But then I heard another sound, Sirens, a wail that started low and distant and grew louder and louder until it filled the night. Blue and red lights flashed through the frosted glass panels of the front door, painting the foyer in a chaotic disco of law enforcement. The pounding stopped. I walked to the living room window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. 2 squad cars had pulled into the driveway, boxing in the yellow taxi that had dropped them off. 4 officers were approaching the porch, their hands resting near their holsters. I saw Julian raise his hands. I saw him trying to talk his way out of it, using that charm that had worked on me for 30 years. But the police weren't buying it. One of the officers spun him around and slammed him against the hood of the cruiser. I watched as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Monica was screaming, kicking at a female officer, her sun hag flying off into the rhododendron bushes. She was handcuffed too, still shouting about her rights and her followers. The neighbors were coming out onto their porches now. Mrs. Higgins was watching. The Petersons across the street were watching. My son, the prince, was being dragged away in front of the entire kingdom. They were shoved into the back of separate squad cars. The taxi driver, realizing he wasn't getting paid and wanting no part of this drama, threw their cheap duffel bags onto the grass and drove off, his tires squealing on the asphalt. I watched until the squad cars backed out of the driveway. I watched until the red and blue lights faded into the distance and the silence returned to Willow Creek Lane. I let the curtain fall. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the fabric. "Are you all right, Clara?" Sterling asked gently from behind me. "No," I said, turning away from the window. "I'm not." I walked to the kitchen. I poured the cold coffee down the sink. "But I will be," I added, looking at the empty counter where my husband's picture should have been, "because I have work to do, and the real fight hasn't even started yet." The morning sun didn't bring warmth to Willow Creek Lane. It brought a cold, clinical clarity that exposed every flaw in my shattered life. I sat at the kitchen island, the one Monica had insisted on replacing the granite with Carrara marble because it photographed better, clutching a mug of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The house was quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a sanctuary, but the hollow, ringing quiet of a crime scene after the police tape has been taken down. The air still smelled faintly of the industrial cleaner the night crew had used to scrub the mud and shame out of the foyer rugs, but underneath that, there was still the lingering scent of betrayal. Sterling was sitting across from me, surrounded by stacks of legal files that looked like fortifications on a battlefield. He looked exhausted, the bags under his eyes heavy enough to carry groceries, but his suit was as crisp as ever. He was on the phone with the district attorney's office, speaking in that low, dangerous tone he used when he was about to ruin someone's day. Mr. Graves was standing by the back door, peering out through the blinds into the backyard, his hand resting casually near his hip holster. It felt less like a home and more like a command bunker. "Okay," Sterling said, hanging up the phone and rubbing his temples. "Here is the situation report. Clara, it's comprehensive." "Give it to me straight, Sterling," I said, staring at the empty spot on the wall where a family photo used to hang before Monica purged it. "I don't have the energy for sugarcoating today." "Step 1, the foreclosure," Sterling said, sliding a document across the marble. "Since we have the physical evidence of the forgery, and since Julian is currently in custody for fraud, the bank has frozen the foreclosure proceedings. They are opening an internal fraud investigation. I filed an affidavit of identity theft. The lien will be removed, Clara. It will take months of paperwork and handwriting analysis, but the house is safe. They can't take it." I let out a breath, my shoulders dropping an inch. The house was safe. My foundation held. "Step 2, the assets," Sterling continued. "We have frozen the joint accounts completely. I have successfully contested the credit card charges for the trip. American Express is refunding the flights and the resort deposit as unauthorized fraud. That money is coming back to you. As for the jewelry," he paused, looking uncomfortable. "The police are processing the pawn shop records. We might get the ring back, but the cash and the gold coins, if he spent them or hid them, they might be gone for good." "It's just metal," I said, though the thought of my mother's ring sitting in a pawn shop display case made my stomach turn. What about him? Julian is currently being processed at the county jail, Sturman said, his voice devoid of emotion. Because of the flight risk, being caught with bags packed after a trip to Mexico, and the nature of the financial crimes, the judge set bail high, $50,000. $50,000. The exact amount he needed to pay the interest to Vinny. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. He called me this morning, Sterling added softly, from the holding cell. I looked up, and he begged me to ask you to post it. He said it was a mistake. He said he was just trying to leverage assets. He said he couldn't survive in there. And what did you tell him? I told him that my client does not negotiate with terrorists, domestic or otherwise, Sterling said with a grim little smile. However, he has been assigned a public defender, a Mr. Miller. Miller is already making noise. He's threatening to sue for the eviction, claiming Julian established tenancy and you locked him out illegally. Let him sue, I said, the fire in my chest flaring up again. I have the protective order. I have the police report for the jewelry. I have the forged deed. If Mr. Miller wants to drag this into civil court, he opens himself and his client up to discovery. And discovery will bury Julian so deep he'll need a mining rig to find daylight. There is one other thing, Clara, Sterling said, and his voice dropped. The hesitation was back. Mr. Graves found something else in the basement, or rather, he found out who owns the rest of Julian's debt. I went still. Vinny Moretti, Graves said from the door, turning to face us. I made some calls to my contacts in the Vice Squad. Moretti isn't just a bookie, Mrs. Thorne. He's a mid-level heavy for the cartel's money laundering operations in the city. He uses the sports book to wash cash. He's violent, he's protected, and he doesn't write off bad debts. He's a shark, I whispered. He's a shark who thinks you have his bait, Graves corrected. If Julian owes him $150,000, Vinny isn't going to just write that off because Julian is in a cell. In his world, debt attaches to the bloodline. He considers you the co-signer whether you signed a paper or not. As if on cue, a loud crash shattered the morning silence. I jumped, knocking my coffee mug onto the floor. It shattered, spraying black liquid across the white cabinets. The sound came from the front of the house, the living room. Stay down, Graves shouted, drawing his weapon in a fluid motion. Sterling, get her to the pantry. Sterling grabbed my arm, pulling me off the stool, dragging me toward the walk-in pantry. Graves moved toward the living room, moving like a cat, silent and lethal. I crouched on the floor of the pantry, surrounded by cans of soup and bags of flour, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Was this it? Was this the end? Was Vinny Moretti coming through my front door with a gun? Clear, Graves shouted a moment later. It's clear, no shooter. I stood up, my knees shaking, and walked out into the kitchen. Sterling was right behind me. We followed Graves into the living room. The beautiful bay window, the one that looked out over the hydrangeas, was shattered. Glass was everywhere, glistening like diamonds on the hardwood floor. Lying in the middle of the rug, surrounded by shards, was a red brick. Wrapped around it with a rubber band was a piece of paper. Graves put on a pair of latex gloves from his pocket. He picked up the brick. He slid the paper out and unfolded it. He didn't read it out loud. He just looked at it, his jaw tightening. Read it, I commanded, stepping over the glass. Graves turned the paper around. It was a simple note. The mother pays for the sins of the son. 48 hours, or we take the house. I stared at the words. They were crude, they were violent, they were a promise. He's escalating, Sterling said, his voice trembling slightly. Clara, this is a direct threat. This isn't a legal dispute anymore. This is life or death. You need to leave. Right now. We can have a car here in 5 minutes. Go to a hotel. Go to Europe. Let the police handle this. The police? I let out a short, harsh laugh. The police will come, they will take a report, they will file it, and they will tell me to get a restraining order against a man named John Doe. And while they are filing their paperwork, Vinnie Moretti will throw a Molotov cocktail through that broken window and burn my legacy to the ground. Clara, be reasonable, Sterling pleaded. You are a businesswoman, not a soldier. I am a mother, I said, looking at the shattered glass. And I am a homeowner. And nobody drives me out of my own house. I walked over to the window. The warm air was rushing in, carrying the sounds of the birds who didn't know or care that my world was ending. If I run, he wins, I said softly. If I run, I am just another old woman scared of the big bad wolf. I fought union bosses who threatened to break my knees in the 80s. I fought banks who redlined my business loans. I am not letting a thug with a marker take this from me. Then what do you want to do? Graves asked. He didn't look scared. He looked ready. I turned to face them. I smoothed my skirt. I adjusted my glasses. I want to buy the debt. Sterling choked. Excuse me? You heard me. Vinnie wants his money. He doesn't care where it comes from. He's a businessman, a violent, illegal businessman, but a businessman nonetheless. He has a distressed asset, Julian's debt. It's currently worthless because Julian is in jail. I want to acquire that asset. Clara, you cannot pay a loan shark, Sterling shouted, losing his composure. It's practically money laundering. It encourages extortion. You are funding criminals. It's not extortion if I'm buying leverage, I said, walking back to the kitchen to get a broom. I'm not just paying Julian's debt to free him. I'm buying the note. I want to become Julian's creditor. I want to own the debt that is hanging over his head. Sterling stared at me, his mouth open. Why? Why would you spend $150,000 to save the son who robbed you? I'm not saving him, I said, sweeping the glass into a pile. If Vinnie owns the debt, he breaks Julian's legs or kills him. If I own the debt, I own Julian. I can garnish his wages for the rest of his life. I can control his financial rehabilitation. I can ensure he never hurts anyone else again. The only way to stop a gambler is to take away the casino. I'm buying the casino, Sterling. This is dangerous, Clara. Meeting with Moretti, he isn't a board member. He's a killer. I won't go alone, I said, looking at Graves. Mr. Graves will be there, and he will bring his friends. Graves nodded. I can set it up. But Mrs. Thorne, if we do this, we do it on neutral ground, and we go in heavy. Heavy is fine, I said. Set it up, Graves. Find out where he eats lunch. Find out where he feels safe. And tell him Clara Thorne wants a sit-down. I looked back at the brick sitting on the coffee table. He gave me 48 hours. I'll give him 24. The waiting was the hardest part, harder even than finding the empty safe or watching the police drag my son off my front lawn. It took Mr. Graves 3 hours to set up the meeting. 3 hours where I sat in my living room, staring at the shattered glass of the bay window, listening to the wind whistle through the cardboard Graves had taped up over the hole. Every car that drove by made my muscles tense. Every creak of the settling house sounded like a footstep. But when Graves finally walked back into the kitchen, holstering his phone, his face was grim but nodded. It's set, he told me. Midnight. The Galaxy Diner off Interstate 35. It's neutral ground, open 24 hours, lots of truckers. Vinnie agreed, but he said to come alone. I looked at Graves, at the scar running down his jaw, and I told him that Vinnie Moretti didn't get to dictate the terms of my safety. We weren't going alone. The ride to the diner was a study in controlled terror. I sat in the back of Graves' armored SUV, the leather cool against my palms, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. We were flanked by two other cars, unmarked sedans filled with men Graves had called in, men who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast. I wasn't wearing my usual business attire. I had changed into a black wool suit, severe and sharp, the kind I used to wear when I was firing incompetent executives. I wore the emerald ring I had reclaimed from the pawn shop. It felt heavy on my finger, a talisman of my survival. I had $50,000 in cash in a leather briefcase sitting on the seat next to me. It was a staggering amount of money to carry into a roadside diner in the middle of the night, but I knew men like Vinnie. They didn't believe in wire transfers or cashier's checks. They believed in the smell of paper money. We pulled into the parking lot of the Galaxy Diner at 11:55 p.m. The neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering pink and blue, casting long, erratic shadows across the asphalt. There were a few semi-trucks idling in the back, their diesel engines rumbling low, but the front lot was mostly empty except for a flashy black Cadillac Escalade parked right by the door. "That's him," Graves said, eyeing the SUV. "He brought muscle, too. I count 2 in the front seat." Graves turned to me, his eyes serious. "Mrs. Thorne, once we walk through those doors, I can't guarantee anything. If this goes south, you get under the table. Do you understand?" I nodded, though my throat felt like sandpaper. "It won't go south," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "It's a business transaction, and I've never lost a negotiation." I stepped out of the car. The night air smelled of grease, exhaust, and distant rain. Graves walked beside me, his body angled to shield mine, his hand hovering near his jacket. We pushed open the glass doors of the diner. The bell chimed, a cheerful little sound that felt completely out of place. The diner was mostly empty, just a weary waitress wiping down the counter and a couple of truckers eating pie in silence. And there, in the furthest booth in the back corner, sat Vinnie Moretti. He looked exactly like I expected, and yet nothing like I expected. He wasn't wearing a tracksuit or a leather jacket. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, but it fit him poorly, straining at the shoulders and neck. He had a thick neck, slicked back hair that caught the neon light, and eyes that were completely dead. He was cutting into a stack of pancakes with a surgical precision that made my skin crawl. He didn't look up when we approached. He just kept eating, making us wait, a power move I had seen a dozen CEOs try in boardrooms. I didn't wait. I slid into the booth opposite him without asking. Graves stood at the edge of the table, arms crossed, staring daggers at Vinnie. "Mrs. Thorne," Vinnie said, finally looking up. He wiped his mouth. With a paper napkin, his movements slow and deliberate. "You have a lot of nerve. Most people, when they get a brick through their window, they call the cops or they run. They don't ask for a dinner date." His voice was like gravel in a mixer, rough and scraping. "I'm not most people, Mr. Moretti," I said, placing my hands on the table, clasping them to hide the tremor. "And I'm not here for dinner. I'm here to clean up a mess." Vinnie chuckled, a low, wet sound. "Your boy, Julian, he's a mess all right. $150,000 mess, plus interest. The vig is ticking, mama. Every hour you sit here, the price goes up." "My name is Mrs. Thorne," I corrected him, my voice sharp, "not mama. And we both know Julian isn't going to pay you. He is currently a guest of the county jail. He has no assets. I froze his accounts. I seized his property. He is destitute. You can break his legs, you can burn down my house, but you cannot squeeze blood from a stone." Vinnie leaned back, picking his teeth with a toothpick. Maybe not, but pain has a value. It sends a message to the other deadbeats. If I let him walk, I look soft. I don't like looking soft. I'm not asking you to let him walk, I said. I'm asking you to sell me the debt. Vinny paused. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. Sell it? I want to buy the note, I said. I reached down and lifted the heavy leather briefcase onto the table. I unclicked the latches. The sound was loud in the quiet diner. I opened the lid just enough for him to see the stacks of banded $100 bills. $50,000, cash, tonight, unmarked, non-sequential. Vinny looked at the money. His eyes didn't widen, he was used to money, but his posture shifted. He leaned forward. He owes me $1.50. 50 is a third. That's a bad haircut. 50 is real, I countered, leaning in to meet his gaze. 150 is a fantasy. You can chase Julian for the rest of your life. You can send your goons to jail for assault. You can spend money on lawyers and bribes. Or you can take $50,000 of pure profit right now, tax-free, and walk away. It's a simple calculation, Mr. Moretti. Risk versus reward. Right now, your risk is high and your reward is 0. I'm offering you an exit strategy. Vinny stared at the money, then at me. He was calculating. He was a predator, but he was also a businessman. He knew a distressed asset when he saw one.
"You're a cold piece of work," he said, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice. "Buying your own kid's debt? What's the play? You gonna forgive it? Give him a hug?" "That's none of your concern," I said. "But if you must know, I don't intend to forgive it. I intend to collect it, every single penny. But I will collect it on my terms, not yours, and without violence." Vinny drummed his fingers on the table. The tension was so thick I could taste it, metallic and sharp. Graves shifted his weight beside me, his hand dropping inches closer to his weapon. Vinny's eyes flicked to Graves, then back to me. 75, Vinny said. 50, I said, not blinking. And I forget I have a dossier on your sanitation routes that my security team compiled this morning. I forget about the connections to the warehouse district. I forget to hand that file to the FBI task force that is already looking into the crypto operation my son was running. It was a bluff, mostly. Graves had found some dirt, but not enough to bring down a cartel. But Vinny didn't know that. Vinny saw a woman who had drilled the locks off her own house and put her son in jail. He saw a woman who was capable of anything. He stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. "Done," he said finally. I let out a breath I had been holding for 5 minutes. I reached into my purse and pulled out a document Sterling had drafted. It was a simple assignment of debt. It wasn't legally binding in a court of law, perhaps, but in the world of the street, a signature meant everything. "Sign it," I said, sliding the paper and a pen across the table. "It states that the debt is satisfied in full as far as you are concerned, and all interest is transferred to me." Vinny laughed, a short bark of amusement. He signed the paper with a flourish. "You're tougher than your son, that's for sure. He cried like a baby when I showed him the pliers. You don't even blink." "My son is a child," I said, taking the paper back and checking the signature. "I am the one who raised him. He forgot where he came from." I slid the briefcase across the table. Vinny grabbed it, checked the contents quickly, and nodded. "Pleasure doing business, Mrs. Thorne," he said, sliding out of the booth. He stood up, looming over me. "Tell Julian he's lucky. If it was anyone else, he'd be learning to walk on prosthetics." "He's not lucky," I said, staring up at him. "He's owned,
and his new boss is much less forgiving than you are." Vinny laughed again and walked out of the diner, his entourage trailing behind him. I watched the Escalade peel out of the parking lot. Only then did I allow my shoulders to slump. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. "You did it," Graves said, his voice full of awe. "I didn't think he'd take it." "Everyone has a price, Mr. Graves," I said, picking up the paper that gave me ownership of my son's life. "The trick is knowing what currency they accept." I looked at the paper. Vinny was gone. The physical threat was gone. But the war wasn't over. Now I had to face the prisoner. Now I had to tell Julian that he hadn't just lost his freedom to the state, he had lost his future to his mother. "Let's go," I said, standing up on my aching legs. "I want to go home. I have a phone call to wait for." We walked out into the night air. It felt cleaner now. The humidity had broken, and a cool breeze was coming in from the north. I got into the car, clutching the contract to my chest. I had saved my son's life, and in doing so, I had ensured that he would spend the rest of it paying for his sins. It was a cruel mercy, but it was the only kind I had left to give. 3 days later, I stood outside the county jail, a brutalist monstrosity of concrete and razor wire that sat in the center of downtown like a gray tumor. I was wearing a suit of armor, my charcoal gray wool Chanel suit, a silk scarf tied precisely at my throat, and the emerald ring I had reclaimed from the pawn shop shining on my finger like a green eye watching everything. I wasn't there to visit a friend. I wasn't there to do charity work. I was there to visit an inmate. Elias had arranged the visitation, though he had begged me not to go. He said Julian was unstable, that he would beg, that it would be too painful for a mother to see her only child in a cage. But I told Elias that a contract isn't valid until both parties understand the terms, and Julian needed to read the fine print of his new life. I walked through the metal detectors, enduring the pat-down from a female guard who looked tired of her job and tired of life. I surrendered my purse, my phone, and my dignity, placing them in a locker with a rusted key. The air inside the facility was different from the air outside. It was cold, recycled, and smelled of industrial-strength cleaner, trying and failing to mask the scent of the unwashed bodies and despair. I sat in the visitation booth on a bolted-down metal stool that chilled me through my skirt. I waited behind the thick, scratched plexiglass that separated the free from the condemned. On either side of me, other families were crying, pressing their hands against the barrier, murmuring promises they couldn't keep. I didn't cry. I folded my hands on the metal counter and watched the door. When it finally buzzed open, my breath hitched in my throat. I almost didn't recognize him. The man who walked in wasn't the swaggering real estate mogul who drove a Tesla and drank 18-year-old scotch. He was a ghost. His designer haircut was gone, replaced by a messy, greasy mop that hadn't seen shampoo in days. He had dark circles under his eyes, so deep they looked like bruises, and his skin was a sickly, pasty gray. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit with the county numbers stenciled on the chest in fading black ink. It hung off him loosely, swallowing his frame. He had lost weight. He looked small. He looked terrified. He sat down on the stool opposite me. He didn't pick up the phone immediately. He just looked at me. For a split second, I saw a flash of the old Julian, the defiance, the entitlement, the boy who thought he was a prince who had been wrongfully inconvenienced. But then he looked at my face. He looked at the stone-cold resolve in my eyes, the lack of pity, and the defiance crumbled into dust. He picked up the black receiver with a trembling hand. "Mom," he croaked. His voice was rough, like he had been screaming or crying for hours. "You came?" I picked up my receiver. "I'm here, Julian." "Mom, you have to get me out," he said, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a frantic, desperate rush. "It's a nightmare in here. You have no idea. There's a guy in the cell next to me. He screams all night. He bangs his head against the wall. I haven't slept. The food I can't eat it. It smells like rot. I think I'm getting sick. Please, Elias said bail is $50,000. I know you have it. You have to post it. Just post it. I'll work it off. I swear to God, I'll do anything." I listened to him beg. I listened to the panic rising in his voice. I waited until he ran out of breath. "I know you'll work it off," I said calmly, "but not from out there." He blinked, confusion clouding his eyes. "What?" "I'm not posting your bail, Julian." He froze. The receiver shook in his hand. "But, Vinny, Mom, you don't
Understand, it's not just the jail, it's Vinny. If I stay in here, Vinny's guys, they have reach, even inside, especially inside. If I don't pay him, I'm dead. They'll get to me in the showers or the yard. You have to get me out so I can hide. You have to save me." "You don't have to worry about Vinny," I said. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out the document Vinny had signed at the diner. I unfolded it, smoothing the creases against the cold metal counter, and pressed it flat against the glass. "Read it," I commanded. Julian squinted, leaning forward. His eyes darted back and forth as he read the scrawled handwriting on the diner napkin and the formal legal addendum attached to it. "Debt satisfied. Interest transferred. Creditor rights assigned to Clara Thorne." You paid him?" Julian whispered, his eyes widening until they looked like they might pop out of his head. $50,000? You paid Vinny $50,000? "I bought the debt," I corrected him. "Vinny got his principal back. He walked away. He doesn't know your name anymore. You are safe from the mob, Julian. No one is going to break your legs. No one is going to touch you." He let out a sob of relief so loud I could hear it through the glass without the phone. He slumped against the metal counter, tears streaming down his face, washing away the grime on his cheeks. "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you, Mom. I knew it. I knew you loved me. I knew you wouldn't let them hurt me. I told Monica you'd come through. I told her you were the only one who cared." He looked up at me, a shaky, hopeful smile breaking through the tears. It was the smile he used when he wanted a new car or a vacation. "So when can I come home? If Vinny is gone, I can come home, right? I can help with the house. I can help you run the business. We can start over. I'll make it up to you. I'll be the best son you've ever had." "Stop," I said. The word was soft, but it hit him like a sledgehammer. The smile vanished. "You aren't coming home, Julian, and you aren't running anything. You aren't stepping foot in my house or my business ever again." "But you paid the debt. You saved me." "I bought the debt," I repeated, leaning in closer to the glass so he could see the fire in my eyes. "Do you know what that means, Julian? Do you understand finance?" He shook his head, slowly, terrified. "It means Vinny isn't your creditor anymore," I said. "I am. You owe me $150,000, plus the $800 for the ring you stole, plus the $12,000 for the trip you tried to take, plus the legal fee Sterling is charging me to stop the foreclosure you caused. You owe me nearly $200,000. "Mom, I'll pay you back, I promise. I'll get a job." "I know you will," I said, "because I have filed a lien against your future earnings. For the rest of your life, Julian, 25% of every dime you make belongs to me. If you get a tax refund, I take it. If you inherit money from anyone else, I take it. If you win the lottery, I take it. If you dig a ditch for minimum wage, I get a quarter of every dollar." You can't do that," he stammered. "I can," I said, "and I have. The paperwork is filed." "But why?" he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter, making the guard in the corner look over. "If you paid Vinny, why leave me in here? Why not just bail me out? Why treat me like this?"
Because you committed a felony, I said, my voice trembling with the effort to keep my composure, fighting back the tears that wanted to fall. You forged a deed. You stole my jewelry. You wiretapped my home. Those are crimes, Julian, not mistakes, not bad judgment calls, crimes. You tried to destroy me. I'm your son. And that is exactly why I am leaving you here, I said. Because if I bail you out, you will never change. You will think that no matter what you do, no matter who you hurt, no matter what laws you break, Mommy will write a check. You think love is a get-out-of-jail-free card. You think love is me setting myself on fire to keep you warm. I placed my hand against the glass, matching it to his. Love is not enabling, Julian. Love is teaching you that actions have consequences. You wanted to be a big shot? You wanted to play with the big boys and the crypto farms and the loan sharks? Well, this is the big leagues. You do the crime, you do the time. I saved your life from Vinny because I am your mother and I want you to live. But I am leaving you in this cell because I want you to become a man. I hate you, he screamed. The mask fell completely then. The face looking back at me wasn't my son. It was a stranger filled with hate and entitlement. I hate you. You're a cold-hearted witch. Monica was right about you. You just want to control everything. Monica, I said, keeping my voice level, is currently in Ohio living with her parents. She filed for divorce yesterday. She cited financial fraud as the reason. She left you, Julian, because without my money, you are nothing to her. She didn't even wait for the bail hearing. Julian stopped screaming. The fight went out of him all at once. He slumped on the stool, looking destroyed, hollowed out. I have nothing, he whispered. You have your life, I said. I saved that. The rest, you have to earn it back. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years. I've set up a commissary account for you, I said. Enough for toothpaste, soap, and phone calls. Do not call me to beg. Do not call me to scream. Call me when you're ready to apologize, truly apologize, when you understand what you did. I hung up the phone. I turned and walked away. I heard him screaming my name, banging on the glass, the sound muffled and distant. Mom! Mom, come back! Don't leave me! Mom! I didn't turn around. I walked through the heavy steel doors, past the guards, past the metal detectors. I walked out of the jail and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I got into my car, locked the doors, and for the first time in 20 years, I wept. I cried until my chest ached. I cried for the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. I cried for the man he could have been if I hadn't made life so easy for him. But I didn't turn the car around. I put it in drive, and I went home. The drive back from the county jail was a blur of gray highways and red brake lights, a visual representation of exactly how I felt inside. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. I had sent Mr. Graves and his team home because I needed to be alone. But my soul felt like it was vibrating at a frequency that could shatter glass. I had just sentenced my only child to prison. I had looked him in the eye, seen his terror, and refused to open the cage. People talk about tough love like it's a slogan on a bumper sticker, but they don't tell you that it feels exactly like heartbreak. It feels like amputation. You cut off the limb to save the body, but you still feel the phantom pain of where that part of you used to be. By the time I pulled into the driveway of Willow Creek Lane, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the lawn where the police had tackled Julian just a few days ago. The house looked different now. It didn't look like a crime scene anymore, thanks to the cleaning crew I had hired, but it felt heavy. It felt, keep the mature female voice, aged 50 plus. However, I want a calmer, flatter delivery with less dramatic pitch variation and fewer emotional ups and downs. The focus should be clarity and steadiness, reading the text in a straightforward, easy-to-understand manner, almost like a calm audiobook narration. Crucially, while maintaining this calm style, increase the reading pace significantly so it is fluent and conversational, not slow or heavy. Like a fortress that had survived a siege but lost its garrison. I walked inside, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a heavy wool blanket. I didn't go to the kitchen, I didn't go to my bedroom. I walked straight to the living room, to the pile of donation boxes that were still sitting in the corner where Julian and Monica had left them. I reached in and pulled out the portrait of Marcus, my late husband. The canvas was slightly bent at the corner, a physical scar from his son's disrespect. I carried it to the fireplace. Above the mantel, that ridiculous pink neon sign, "Good Vibes Only," was still buzzing, casting a tacky, cheap light over the room. It was the flag of their occupation, a symbol of their shallow, filtered lives. I didn't bother finding a ladder. I grabbed the fire poker from the hearth, reached up and smashed the glass tubing. The sound was a loud pop, followed by the tinkling of broken glass raining down onto the hearth. The buzzing stopped, the pink light died. I hooked the frame of the sign with the poker and ripped it off the wall, letting it crash onto the floor. I kicked the debris aside, picked up Marcus's portrait, and hung it back where it belonged. He looked out over the room again, his painted eyes kind and steady. "I'm sorry," I whispered to him. "I fixed it. It took me too long, but I fixed it." The next few weeks became a blur of administrative violence. I didn't wallow in my grief, I drowned it in paperwork. I attacked the mess Julian had left behind with the same ruthless efficiency I used to build my catering empire. First, the basement. I hired a specialized crew to dismantle the crypto mining farm. It took them 2 days to haul out the server racks, the cooling units, and the miles of illegal wiring that Mr. Graves said was a ticking time bomb for an electrical fire. The equipment, which Julian had spent nearly $120,000 on, money he borrowed against my house, was sold for scrap and parts. We got pennies on the dollar, maybe $15,000 total, but it wasn't about the money, it was about the exorcism. I watched the trucks haul the metal away, and then I hired painters. I had the walls painted a soft, calming slate blue. I had cedar shelves installed. I turned the man cave into the library I had always wanted, filling the shelves with my books, my records, and the silence I had earned. Then came the business. Elias and I spent 40 hours in the boardroom of Washington events over the course of a week. We restructured everything. Julian had been listed as a beneficiary on several insurance policies and had a future claim to the company shares in my will. We burned those documents. We created a new entity, the Beatrice Washington Charitable Trust. I remained the trustee for life, retaining full control, but upon my death, the ownership of the company would not pass to my next of kin. It would pass to a board of directors with a mandate to fund culinary trade schools for underprivileged youth in the city. I disinherited my son from the empire I built. He could never sell it, he could never leverage it, he could never destroy it. Elias warned me that it was irrevocable, that I couldn't change my mind if I got sentimental later. I signed the papers, with a pen that didn't shake once. I wasn't getting sentimental, I was getting secure. While I was fortifying my legacy, the legal system was grinding Julian down. His public defender, Mr. Miller, tried to make noise. He filed a motion to dismiss the eviction, claiming Julian had established residency. I countered with the protective order and the police report for the grand larceny. The motion was dismissed in 10 minutes. Miller then tried to get a plea deal for probation, arguing that this was a family misunderstanding and that Julian was a first-time offender with potential. The prosecutor, a sharp woman who had seen the bank fraud documents and the forged deed, laughed him out of the office. The amount of money involved, over $250,000 in attempted mortgage fraud, plus the theft of the jewelry, pushed this into aggravated felony territory. They weren't offering probation, they were offering 5 years. Monica, true to form, didn't stick around for the fallout. The moment she made bail, paid for by her parents in Ohio, who probably mortgaged their own house to do it, she fled the state. She filed for divorce remotely, citing irreconcilable differences and financial fraud. She sent me a long, rambling email threatening to write a tell-all book about how I was a toxic mother-in-law who drove her son to crime. I forwarded it to Elias, who sent her a cease and desist letter so terrifying that her social media accounts went dark 24 hours later. She was gone, a parasite that had detached itself once the host stopped bleeding money. I felt no pity for her. She had whispered the poison in his ear, but Julian was the one who decided to swallow it. The day of the sentencing hearing arrived 2 months later. The autumn leaves were starting to turn gold on Willow Creek Lane, a stark contrast to the gray suit I wore to the courthouse. I wasn't required to be there. The plea deal had been signed, but the judge asked for a victim impact statement. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my hands folded in my lap. When they brought Julian in, the change in him was shocking. The county jail diet and the reality of his situation had hollowed him out. He looked 20 years older. He scanned the room, looking for a friendly face, perhaps hoping Monica would be there. She wasn't. Only I was there, the woman he tried to erase. The judge, a stern man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, looked over the file. He looked at the forgery evidence. He looked at the police report about the pawned ring. He looked at Julian. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, his voice booming in the quiet courtroom, "you are a privileged young man who had every advantage in life. You had a mother who provided you with a home, an education, and a safety net. And your response to that generosity was to systematically dismantle her life for your own gain, to treat your mother as a resource to be mined rather than a person to be respected." Julian looked down at the table, his shoulders shaking. "I sentence you to 5 years in the state penitentiary," the judge continued. "You will be eligible for parole in 3, pending good behavior and restitution. And I am issuing a permanent restraining order barring you from contact with Mrs. Washington or her assets unless she initiates it." As the bailiff moved to handcuff him, Julian turned his head. Our eyes met across the divide of the courtroom railing. He didn't scream this time. He didn't beg. He just looked at me with a profound, shattering sadness. He nodded just once, a small, resigned movement that acknowledged the truth. The safety net was gone. He was falling, and for the first time in his life, he was going to hit the ground. I didn't look away until he was led through the side door. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the courtroom. The air outside was crisp and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs without the weight of his secrets pressing on my chest. That night, I sat in my new library in the basement. It was quiet, no fans whirring, no heat, no blinking lights, just the smell of old paper and cedar. I had a glass of wine. On the side table, I opened a book, but I didn't read. I thought about the empty bedroom upstairs. I thought about the silence in the house. It was lonely, yes. I won't lie and say it wasn't. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from mourning a person who is still alive. But as I sat there, I touched the emerald ring on my finger. I looked at the walls of the house I had saved. I realized that this loneliness was the price of my peace, and it was a price I was willing to pay. I had my dignity. I had my home, and somewhere in a cold cell, my son was finally learning the lesson I should have taught him when he was 10. The phone rang. It was the prison automated system. "You have a call from an inmate at the state correctional facility. Press 1 to accept." I stared at the phone. I had told him not to call until he was ready to apologize, truly apologize. It had been 2 months. Was he ready? Or was he calling to ask for money for the commissary? I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't press 1. I wasn't ready to hear his voice yet, and he needed to learn that access to me was a privilege, not a right. The phone stopped ringing. I took a sip of wine and turned the page of my book. He would call again, and maybe in 6 months or a year, when he had folded enough sheets in the prison laundry to understand the value of labor, I would answer, but not tonight. Tonight, the queen was resting in her castle, and the drawbridge was up. The seasons changed on Willow Creek Lane with a quiet, indifferent beauty that I had never really stopped to appreciate before. Winter came and stripped the oak trees bare, turning the lush green lawn into a tapestry of frost and brown earth. And for the first time in decades, I didn't have a crisis to manage. There were no frantic calls about overdrawn accounts, no unexpected guests crashing in the guest cottage. My life had become a calm, steady river, flowing exactly where I directed it. I hired a new executive assistant, a sharp-witted young woman named Elena, who reminded me of myself at 20, hungry, meticulous, and incapable of suffering fools. Together, we expanded Washington events into medical supply logistics, pivoting the fleet to handle sensitive cargo. The business was thriving, the trust was secure, and my bank accounts were finally blissfully boring. But silence has a way of amplifying the things you try not to hear. Julian was 6 months into his 5-year sentence. The angry phone calls had stopped after that first month. I suppose he realized that screaming at me was like screaming at a mountain. It might make him feel better, but the mountain wasn't going to move. Instead, the letters started coming. At first, they were short, angry scrawls on lined yellow paper, complaining about the guards, the noise, the injustice of it all. He wrote about how the other inmates were animals, how he didn't belong there, how I was cruel for leaving him to rot. I read them standing by the kitchen island, drinking my morning tea. I didn't reply to the angry ones. I simply folded them up and placed them in a box I kept in the pantry. I wasn't ignoring him. I was waiting. I was waiting for the boy who blamed the world to die so the man who took responsibility could be born. Around month 4, the tone of the letters shifted. The handwriting became less jagged, more thoughtful. He stopped asking for money. He stopped asking for updates on his case. He started writing about the work. They had assigned him to the prison laundry detail. It was brutal, hot work. Industrial presses, heavy canvas bags of soiled uniforms, 12-hour shifts on concrete floors for 45 cents an hour. In one letter, he wrote about burning his forearm on a steam press. It blistered immediately, he wrote. It hurt so bad I wanted to cry, but you can't cry in here. The guard just laughed and told me to put ice on it later. I thought about you, Mom. I remembered when I was 10 and you came home from catering that huge wedding at the governor's mansion. You had a burn on your arm from a sheet pan. It was bright red. I remember asking you what was for dinner. I never asked you if it hurt. I never asked you if you were tired. I just wanted my spaghetti. I had to put that letter down. I had to walk out to the garden and sit on the cold stone bench for 20 minutes before I could finish reading it. He was finally seeing me, not as an ATM, not as a resource, but as a human being who had bled to build the life he squandered. I wrote back that day. I didn't offer sympathy. Sympathy is cheap, but I offered connection. I told him about the garden. I told him about the new contract with the hospital network. I told him that burns heal, but scars remind us not to touch the hot stove again. We fell into a rhythm, a slow, paper-based conversation that felt more honest than any talk we'd had in 20 years. He told me about the books he was reading from the prison library. He told me he was learning Spanish from his cellmate. He told me he missed the smell of rain. He never mentioned Monica, not once. It was as if he had finally realized that she was just a symptom of his disease, not the cure. Then, on a Tuesday in late March, a different kind of envelope arrived. It was small with a window on the front, bearing the seal of the State Department of Corrections. My heart did a little flip. Was he hurt? Was he in trouble? Was he being transferred? I used my silver letter opener to slit the top, my hands trembling just a little. I pulled out the paper. It wasn't a notice of disciplinary action. It wasn't a medical bill. It was a check. I stared at it. It was printed on cheap blue security paper. Pay to the order of Clara Thorne. Remitter, inmate Julian Thorne. Amount $12.50. There was a note attached, written on a scrap of paper torn from a notebook. Mom, this is my first month's wages after the mandatory savings deduction and the court fees. It took me about 30 hours of folding sheets to earn this. It's not much. It won't cover the electric bill I ran up. It won't cover the ring. But it's mine, and I want you to have it. It's the first payment. I know I owe you 200,000. I did the math. At this rate, I'll be square with you in about 400 years. But I'm starting. I'm sorry. Julian. $12.50. It was a pathetic amount of money. It wouldn't buy a cocktail at the clubs he used to frequent. It wouldn't pay for the valet parking at the restaurants he used to take Monica to. But as I stood there in my foyer, holding that check, I felt a lump form in my throat the size of a grapefruit. I had given that boy cars. I had given him tuition. I had given him a house. And he had never, not once, looked at me with anything other than expectation. He had taken it all as his due. But this $12.50 represented 30 hours of sweat. It represented burned arms and aching backs. It represented humility. It was the first honest money my son had ever earned in his life, and he had sent it to me. I didn't cash it. I couldn't. That check was worth more than the face value. I walked into my home office. I took down the framed diploma from his college graduation, the degree he had never used. I slid the diploma out of the frame and replaced it with the check and his handwritten note. Keep the mature female voice, aged 50 plus. However, I want a calmer, flatter delivery, with less dramatic pitch variation and fewer emotional ups and downs. The focus should be on clarity and steadiness, reading the text in a straightforward, easy-to-understand manner, almost like a calm audiobook narration. Crucially, while maintaining this calm style, increase the reading pace significantly so it is fluent and conversational, not slow or heavy. It back on the wall right next to the first dollar I ever made catering, framed in simple black wood. That evening, I sat on the patio with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The phone rang. It was the prison, a scheduled call. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice steady. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice sounded different, deeper, rougher, but calmer. "Did you get the letter? The check?" "I did," I said. "It's not much," he said quickly, sounding embarrassed. "I know it's a joke compared to what I stole." "It's not a joke, Julian," I said softly. "It's a start, and for the record, I hung it on the wall." You framed a check for $12? "I framed the evidence that my son is finally becoming a man," I said. "You can't build a house from the roof down, Julian. You tried that. It collapsed. You have to start with the bricks. This check, this is your first brick." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, a shaky, uneven sound. "I miss home," he whispered. "I miss the hydrangeas. I miss the way the kitchen smells like coffee in the morning." "Home is still here," I said. "It's waiting, but you aren't ready for it yet. And frankly, Julian, it isn't ready for you. You have a lot of bricks to lay before you have a foundation strong enough to stand on this porch again." "I know," he said. "I'm learning to weld. They have a vocational program. I signed up yesterday. I figured I don't want to sit behind a desk anymore. I want to build things. I want to make things that are real." "That sounds like a good plan," I said, smiling into the twilight. "Your father would have liked that. He always said a man who can build is a man who can survive." "Mom?" "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" "For not bailing me out," he said, his voice cracking. "If you had, I think, I would be dead by now. Or I'd be the same person I was, and I hated that person." I didn't like him much either, I admitted. We talked for another 10 minutes. We talked about the weather. We talked about books. We didn't talk about Monica. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the work he had to do tomorrow. When the automated voice cut in to say we had 1 minute left, I didn't feel that old familiar dread of him asking for something. "Goodbye, Julian," I said. "Work hard." "I will, Mom. I love you." "I love you too." The line clicked dead. I put the phone down on the patio table. I looked out at the yard, at the fireflies starting to blink in the bushes. My son was in prison. He was a convicted felon. He was broke. But for the first time in 32 years, I didn't worry about him. I knew where he was. I knew what he was doing, and I knew that he was finally climbing out of the hole he had dug, one $12 check at a time. I took a sip of wine. The air was cool, the house was safe, and I was Beatrice Washington. I had saved my company, I had saved my home, and in the hardest, most brutal way possible, I had saved my son. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. Time moves differently when you stop fighting against the current and start steering the boat. 3 years passed on Willow Creek Lane, not in a blur of chaos, but in a slow, steady rhythm of seasons. The hydrangeas bloomed and withered, the oak trees dropped their leaves and grew them back, and my hip healed until the limp was nothing more than a memory of a bad winter. I had rebuilt my life, brick by brick, into something solid. The business was running on autopilot thanks to the trust and my team, leaving me time to finally read all those books in my basement library. But today, the rhythm was broken. Today was the day the calendar had been marching toward for 36 months. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, smoothing down the lapels of my cream-colored suit. It was the same suit I had worn to the sit-down with Vinnie Moretti, but it felt different now. Back then, it was armor for a war. Today, it was just a suit. I checked my reflection. My hair was fully silver now, styled in a long, elegant braid that cascaded down my back. I looked older, yes. The lines around my eyes were deeper. But I also looked lighter. The weight of carrying a grown man on my back was gone. I drove to the state penitentiary alone. Elias had offered to come, but I told him no. This wasn't a legal matter anymore. It was a family matter. I parked in the visitor lot, watching the heavy steel gates slide open to release the men who had served their time. It was parole day. When Julian walked out, I almost didn't recognize him. The soft, doughy boy who used to whine about the thread count of his sheets was gone. In his place was a man made of wire and grit. He had filled out in the shoulders. 3 years of lifting weights and working industrial machinery will do that. His skin was tanned from the yard work. He was carrying a clear plastic bag with his personal effects, a toothbrush, a few letters, and a welding certification certificate. He squinted against the sun, looking around the lot. He wasn't expecting a limo. He wasn't expecting a party. I rolled down my window. "Get in," I said. He walked over to the car. He hesitated before opening the door, wiping his feet on the pavement as if he were afraid of dirtying the mats. He slid into the passenger seat. He smelled like cheap soap and fresh air. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. His voice was deeper, gravelly. He didn't look at me. He looked at his hands that were calloused, scarred, and stained with grease, hands that had finally learned how to work. "Hello, Julian," I said, putting the car in drive. "Buckle up." We drove in silence for the first 20 minutes. It wasn't the tense, suffocating silence of that ride to the nursing home 3 years ago. It was a tentative silence, like two strangers trying to figure out if they could be friends. "I got a job," he said finally, breaking the quiet, "in Tulsa, an auto body shop. The owner, he hires ex-cons. He liked my welding test." "Tulsa," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "That's a 4-hour drive." "Yeah," he said. I figured I shouldn't be too close. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, and I can't afford the rent in this city anyway." "That's a mature decision," I said, and I meant it. "I'm going to stay at a halfway house for the first 6 months," he continued, as if he were reporting to a parole officer. "Save up for a deposit on an apartment. I'm going to send you checks, Mom, bigger ones. I know $12 isn't much, but once I'm earning a wage—" "I know you will," I said. "I still have the lien on your earnings, Julian. That hasn't changed." He nodded. "I know. I'm glad you do. It keeps me honest." We pulled into the driveway of Willow Creek Lane. The house looked magnificent in the afternoon light. The white pillars gleamed. The garden was a riot of color. Julian stared at it through the windshield. He didn't look at it with greed anymore. He looked at it with reverence, like it was a museum he was allowed to visit but never touch. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. "I made lunch." He swallowed hard. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude." "It's lunch, Julian, not a lease. Come inside." We walked up the path. I watched him looking at the front door.
He didn't reach for a key. He waited for me to unlock it. He wiped his feet on the mat 3 times before stepping onto the foyer rug. He walked into the living room. He stopped at the fireplace. He looked up at the portrait of his father, Marcus, hanging in its rightful place. He looked at the empty spot where the neon "Good Vibes Only" sign used to be. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered to the painting. I walked to the kitchen and brought out a tray, sandwiches, iced tea, simple food. We sat on the back patio, overlooking the pool. The water was blue and still. "I heard about Monica," he said, taking a bite of his sandwich. "Oh?" "Yeah, my cellmate. He had a phone. I looked her up once. She's dating some crypto guy in Miami now. Looks like she found another mark." "She was never the problem, Julian," I said gently. "She was just the gasoline. You were the match." "I know," he said. He put the sandwich down. "Mom, I want you to know something. That day at the nursing home, when I drove away, I saw you in the rearview mirror. You looked so small standing there, and for a second I wanted to turn back. But I was so scared. I was so scared of Vinny and of being broke and of losing Monica. I was a coward." "Yes," I said, "you were." "I'm not that guy anymore," he said, looking me in the eye. "I swear, I don't want your money. I don't want the company. I just want to be your son again, even if it's from a distance, even if it's just a phone call on Sundays." I looked at him. I saw the scars on his arms from the laundry press. I saw the humility in his posture. I saw the man who had survived the fire I threw him into. "You are my son," I said. "You always were. But now you're a son I can respect." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out an envelope. "This isn't money," I warned him before he could recoil. He took the envelope. He opened it. Inside were the keys to a truck. Not a new truck. Not the $65,000 Ford F-150 I had almost bought him. It was a used 5-year-old Toyota Tacoma. Practical, reliable, dent in the bumper. "Mom?" he asked, confused. "You need to get to Tulsa," I said, "and you can't carry your welding gear on a bus. I bought it from one of my fleet mechanics. It runs good. It's in your name. I paid the insurance for 6 months. After that, it's on you." He stared at the keys. His hands started to shake. Tears welled up in his eyes, spilling over onto his cheeks. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "No," I said, "you don't. That's what grace is, Julian. Getting something you don't deserve. But the gas, the maintenance, the repairs, that's on you. If you wreck it, you walk. Do we understand each other?" He nodded furiously, wiping his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, Mom." "Good. Now eat your sandwich. You have a long drive ahead of you." We finished lunch in a comfortable silence. When it was time for him to leave, I walked him to the driveway where the truck was parked. He threw his plastic bag of belongings into the passenger seat. He turned to me. He hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't the performative hug of the past. It was tight. It was desperate. It was real. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair, "for saving my life." "I didn't save your life," I said, patting his back. "I just bought it back from the pawn shop. Now, go make it worth something." I watched him back out of the driveway. I watched him drive down Willow Creek Lane, obeying the speed limit, using his turn signal. I watched until the truck disappeared around the bend. I stood there for a long time, just breathing in the evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. My son dropped me off at a nursing home to die.
He tried to steal my fortune. He tried to erase my legacy. But he forgot who I was. I am Beatrice Washington. I am the woman who turns flour into empires and boys into men. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It broke my heart 1,000 times. But as I walked back into my house, my quiet, safe, paid-for house, I knew I had done the right thing. I taught him the hardest lesson of all. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, because that hand can also close the door. But if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to bleed and sweat and change, that hand might just open a window. I locked the door, I turned on the alarm, and for the first time in 3 years, I went to sleep without a single worry in the world.